Section 16 of Astounding Stories 16, April 1931. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Fournier, Centerville, Virginia, USA. Astounding Stories 16, April 1931, by Various. 4 Miles Within, Chapter 4. Spawn of the Cavern. In a crescendo of noise that stunned their ears, the earth borer came down. Tongues of fire flamed from the hole, speared to the ground, and were deflected upward, cradling the metal ball in a wave of flame. Through this fiery curtain the machine slowly lowered to the floor, where a shower of sparks spattered out, blinding the eyes of the watchers with their brilliance. For a full minute the orange glowing sphere lay there, quivering from the vibration. Then the exhausts died, and the wave of flame wavered and sank into nothingness. While their eardrums continued the thunder, the three stared at the borer, not daring to approach, yet striving to solve the mystery of why it had sunk despite the upthrust of 10 rocket tubes. As their eyes again became accustomed to the familiar phosphorescent illumination, pallid and cold after the fierce orange flame, they saw why, and their eyes went wide with surprise and horror. A strange mass was covering the top of the earth borer, something that looked like a heap of viscid, whitish jelly. It was sprawled shapelessly over the round upper part of the metal sphere, a half-transparent, loathsome stuff, several feet thick in places. And Phil Holmes, striving to understand what it could be, saw an awful thing. "It's moving," he whispered, unconsciously drawing Sue closer. There's life in it." Lazy quiverings were running through the mound of jelly, pulsings that gave evidence of its low organism. They saw little ripples of even beat run over it, and under them steady, sluggish convulsions that told of life, that showed, perhaps, that the thing was hungry, and preparing to move its body in quest of food. It was alive, unquestionably. The borer lay still, but this thing moved internally, of itself. It was life in its lowest, most primate form. The mass was mind, stomach, muscle, and body all in one, stark and raw before their startled eyes. "Oh, God," Phil whispered through the long pause, "it can't be real." "Protoplasm. A monster amoeba," David Guinness's curiously cracked voice said. "Just as it exists on the surface. Only microscopically. Primate life." The lock of the earth borer clicked. Phil gasped. "Quaid is coming out," he said. A little cry of horror came from Sue, and the metal door opened. James Quaid stepped through, automatic in hand. He was fresh from the light inside, and he could not see well. He was quite unconscious of what was oozing down on him from above, of the flabby heap that was carefully stretching down for him. He peered into the gloom, looking for the three he had deserted, and all the time an arm from the mass above crept nearer. Sue Guinness's nerves suddenly gave, and she shrieked, but Quaid's ears were deaf from the borer's thunder, and he did not hear her. It was when he lifted one foot back into the sphere, probably to get out the searchlight, that he felt the thing's presence. He looked up, and a strange sound came from him. For seconds he apparently could not move, stark fear rooting him to the ground, the gun limp in his hand. Then a surge ran through the mound of flesh, and the arm, a pseudopod, reached more rapidly for him. It stung Quaid into action. He leaped back, brought up his automatic, and fired at the thing once, then 3 times more. He, and each one of the others, saw 4 bullets thud into the heap of pallid matter, and heard them clang on the metal of the sphere beneath. They had gone right through its flesh, but they showed no slightest effect. Quaid was evidently unwilling to leave the sphere. Jerking his arm up, he brought his trigger finger back again. A burst of 3 more shots barked through the cavern, echoing and re-echoing. The man screamed an inarticulate oath as he saw how useless his bullets were, and hurled the empty gun at the monster, which was down on the floor now, and bunching its sluggish body together. The automatic went right into it. They could all see it there, in the middle of the amorphous body, while the creature stopped, as if determining whether or not it was food. Quade screwed his courage together in the pause, and tried to dodge past to the door of the sphere, but the monster was alert. Another pseudopod sprang out from its shapeless flesh, sending him back on his heels. The feeler had all but touched Quade, and with the closeness of his escape, the remnants of his courage gave. He yelled and turned and ran. He ran straight for the three who watched from the tunnel mouth, and the mound of shapeless jelly came fast on his trail. It came in surging rolls, like thick fluid oozing forward. It would have been hard to measure its size, for each moment it changed. The only impression the four humans had was that of a wave of half-transparent matter that one instant was a sticky ball of viscid flesh, and the next a rapidly advancing crescent whose horns reached far out on each flank to cut off retreat. By instinct, Phil jerked Sue around and yelled at the professor to run, for the old man seemed to be frozen into an attitude of fearful interest. Bullets would not stop the thing. Could anything? Holmes wondered. He could visualize all too easily the death they would meet if that shapeless, naked, protoplasmic mass overtook and flowed over them. But he wasted no time with such thoughts. They ran, all three, into the dark tunnel. Quade caught up with them quickly. Personal enmity was suspended before this common peril. They could not run at full speed, for a multitude of obstacles hindered them. Tortuous ridges of rock lay directly across their path, formations that had been whipped in some mad, eon-old convulsion, and then, through the ages, remained frozen into their present distortion. Black pits gaped suddenly before them, half-seen stalagmites, whose crystalline edges were razor-sharp, tore through their flesh. Haste was perilous, where every moment they might stumble into an unseen cleft and go pitching into awful depths below. They were staking everything on the draft that blew steadily in their faces. Phil told himself desperately that it must lead to some opening. It must. But what if the opening were a vertical, impassable tunnel? He would not think of that. Old David Guinness tired fast, and was already lagging in the rear, when Quade gasped hoarsely, "Hurry! It's close behind!" Surging rapidly at a constant distance behind them, it came on. It was as fast as they were, and evidently untiring. It was in its own element. Obstacles meant nothing to it. It oozed over the jagged ridges that took the humans precious moments to scramble past, and the speed of its weird progress seemed to increase as theirs faltered. It was a heartless mass, driven inexorably by primal instinct toward the food that lay ahead. The dim phosphorescent illumination tinged its flabby tissues a weird white. The passage they stumbled through narrowed. Long, irregular spheres of stalactites hung from the unseen ceiling. Others, the dripping of ages, pronged up from the floor, shredding their clothes as they jarred into them. One moment they were clambering uphill, slipping on the damp rock. The next they were sliding down into unprobed darkness, reckless of where they would land. They were aware only that the water-odorous draft was still in their faces, and the hungry mound of flesh behind. "I can't last much longer," old Guinness's winded voice gasped. "Best leave me behind. I might delay it." For answer, Phil went back, grabbed him by the arm, and dragged his tired body forward. He was snatching a glance behind to see how close the monster was, when Sue's frightened voice reached him from ahead. "There's a wall here, Phil, and no way through." And then Holmes came to it. It barred the passage and was apparently unbroken. Yet the draft still came. "Search for where the draft enters," he yelled. "You take that side." And he started feeling over the clammy, uneven surface, searching frantically for a cleft. It seemed to be hopeless. Quade stood staring back into the gloom, his eyes looking for what he knew was surging towards them. His face had gone sickly white. He was trembling as if with fever, and he sucked in air with long, racking gasps. "Here! I have it!" cried the girl suddenly at her end of the wall. The other three ran over and saw, just above her head, a narrow rift in the rock, barely wide enough to squirm through. "Into it!" Phil ordered tersely. He grasped her, raised her high, and she wormed through. Quade scrambled to get in next, but Holmes shoved him aside and boosted the old man through. Then he helped the other. A second after he'd swung up himself, a wave of whitish matter rolled up below, hungry pseudopods reaching for the food it knew was near. It began to trickle up the wall. The crack was narrow and jagged, utterly black. Phil could hear Quade frantically worming himself ahead, and he wondered achingly if it would lead anywhere. Then a faint, clear voice from ahead rang out. "It's opening up!" Sue's voice. Phil breathed more easily. The next moment Quade scrambled through. Dim light came, and they were in another vast, ghostly lit cavern. The crack came out on its floor level. Guinness was resting near, and his daughter had her hands on a large boulder of rock. "Let's shove it against the hole," she suggested to Phil. "It might stop it." "Good, Sue, good!" he exclaimed, and at once all four of them strained at the chunk, putting forth every bit of strength they had. The boulder stirred, rolled over, and thudded neatly in front of the crack, almost completely sealing it. There was only a cleft of 5 inches on one side. But their expression of relief died in their throats. A tiny trickle of white appeared through the niche. The amorphous monster was compressing itself to a single stream, thin enough to squeeze through even that narrow space. They could not block it. They had nothing to attack it with. There was nothing to do but run, and hope for a chance to double back. As nearly as they could make out, this second cavern was as large as the first. They could dimly see the fantastic shapes of hundreds of stalactites hanging from the ceiling. Clumps of stalagmites made the floor a maze which they threaded painfully. The strong, steady draft guided them like a radio beacon, leading them to their only faint hope of escape and life. Guinness, very tired, staggered along mechanically, a heavy weight on Phil's supporting arm. James Quade ran here and there in frantic bursts of speed. Sue was silent, but the hopelessness in her eyes tortured Phil like a wound. His shirt had long since been ripped to shred. His face, bruised in the first place by the borer he had crashed in, now was scratched and bloody from contact with rough stalagmites. Then, without warning, they suddenly found among the rough walls on the far side of the cavern the birthplace of the draft. It lay at the edge of the floor, a dark hole, very wide. Black, sinister, and clammy from the draft that poured from it, it pierced vertically down into the very bowels of the earth. It was impassable. James Quade crumpled at the brink. "It's the end," he moaned. "We can't go farther. It's the end of the draft." The hole blocked their forward path completely. They could not go ahead. In seconds, it seemed, the slithering that told of the monster's approach sounded from behind. Sue's eyes were already fixed on the awful, surging mass, when a voice off to one side yelled, "Here! Quick!" It was Phil Holmes. He had been scouting through the gloom and had found something. The other three ran to him. "There's another draft going through here," he explained rapidly, pointing to an angled crevice in the rocky wall. "There's a good chance it goes to the cavern where the sphere and the hole to the surface are. Anyway, we've got to take it. I'd better go first, after this. And you, Quade, last. I trust you less than the monster behind." He turned and edged into the crack, and the others followed as he had ordered. Quickly the passageway broadened, and they found the going much easier than it had been before. For perhaps 10 minutes they scrambled along, with the draft always on their backs and the blessed, though faint fire of hope kindling again. In all that time they did not see their pursuer once, and the hope that they had lost it brought a measure of much-needed optimism to drive their tired bodies onward. They found but few time-wasting obstacles. If only the tunnel would continue right into the original cavern. If only their path would stay clear and unhindered. But it did not. The sound of Phil's footsteps ahead stopped, and when Sue and her father came up, they saw why. "A river," Phil said. They were standing on a narrow ledge that overhung an underground river. A fetid smell of age-old, lifeless water rose from it. Dimly, at least 50 feet across, they could see the other side, shrouded in vague shadows. The inky stream beneath did not seem to move at all, but remained smooth and hard and thick-looking. They could not go around it. The ledge was only a few feet wide, and blocked at each side. "Got to cross," Phil said tersely. Quaid, sickly-faced, stared down. There might be other things in that water," he gasped. "Monsters." "Sure," agreed Phil contemptuously. "You'd better stay here." He turned to the others. "I'll see how deep it is," he said, and without the faintest hesitation dove flatly in. Oily ripples washed back, and they saw his head poke through, sputtering. "Not deep," he said. "Chest high. Come on." He reached for Sue, helped her down, and did the same for her father. Holding each by the hand, Sue's head barely above the water, he started across. They had not gone more than 20 feet when they heard Quaid, left on the bank, give a hoarse yell of fear and dive into the water. Their dread pursuer had caught up with them. And it followed, on the water. Phil had hoped it would not be able to cross, but once more the thing's astounding adaptability dashed his hopes. Without hesitation, the whitest jelly sprawled out over the water, rolling after them with ghastly, snake-like ripples, its pallid body standing out gruesomely against the black, odorous tide. Quaid came up thrashing madly, some feet to the side of the other three. He was swimming, and swimming with such strength that he quickly left them behind. He would be across before they, and that meant there was a good chance that the earth borer would go up again with only one passenger. Phil fought against the water, pulling Sue and her father forward as best he could. From behind came the rippling sound of their shapeless pursuer. 10 feet more, Holmes began, then abruptly stopped. There had been a swish, a ripple upstream, and as their heads turned, they saw the water part and a black head, long, evil, glistening, pointed coldly down to where they were struggling towards the shore. Phil Holmes felt his strength ooze out. He heard Professor Guinness gasp. "A water snake!" Its head was reared above the surface, gliding down on them silently, leaving a wedge of long, sluggish ripples behind. When 30 feet away, the glistening head dipped under. A great half-circle of leg-thick body arched out. It was like an oily stream of curved cable. Then it ended in a pointed tail, and the creature was entirely underwater. With desperate strength, Phil hauled the girl to the bank, and standing in several feet of water, pushed her up. Then he whirled and yanked old Guinness past him up into the hands of his daughter. With them safe, and Sue reaching out her hand for him, he began to scramble up himself. But he was too late. There was a swish in the water behind him, and toothless, hard-gummed jaws clamped tight over one leg and drew him back and under, and with the touch of the creature's mouth, a stiff shock jolted him. His body went numb. His arms flopped limply down. He was paralyzed. Sue Guinness cried out. Her father stared helplessly at the spot where his young partner had disappeared with so little commotion. "It was an eel," he muttered dully. "Some kind of electric eel." Phil dimly realized the same thing. A moment later his face broke the surface, but he could not cry out. He could not move his little finger. Only his involuntary muscles kept working, his heart and his lungs. He found he could control his breathing a little, and then he was wondering why he was remaining motionless on the surface. Gradually he came to understand. He had not felt it, but the eel had let go its hold on his leg and had disappeared. But only for a moment. Suddenly, from somewhere near, its gleaming body writhed crazily, and a terrific twist of its tail hit Phil a glancing blow on the chest. He was swept under, and the water around him became a maelstrom. When next he bobbed to the tumultuous surface, he managed to get a much-needed breath of air, and in the swirling currents glimpsed the long, snake-like head of the eel go shooting by, with thin trickles of stuff that looked like white jelly clinging to it. That explained what was happening. The eel had been challenged by the amoeboid monster, and they were fighting for possession of him, the common prey. The water became an inferno of whipping and lashing movements, of whitish fibers and spearing thrusts of a glistening black electric body. Unquestionably, The eel was using its numbing electric shock on its foe. Time and time again Phil felt the amoeba grasp him, searingly, only to be wrenched free by the force of the currents the combat stirred up. Once he thudded into the bottom of the river, and his lungs seemed about to burst before he was again shot to the top and managed to get a breath. At last the water quieted somewhat, and Phil, at the surface, saw the eel bury its head in a now apathetic mound of flesh. It tore a portion loose with savage jaws, a portion that still writhed after it was separated from the parent mass, and then the victor glided swiftly downstream and disappeared under the surface. Holmes floated helplessly on the inky water. He could see the amoeba plainly. It was still partly paralyzed, for it was very still. But then a faint tremor ran through it. A wave ran over its surface, and it moved slowly towards him once again. Desperately, Phil tried to retreat. The will was there, but the body would not work. Save for a feeble flutter of his hands and feet, he could not move. He could not even turn around to bid Sue and David Guinness goodbye with his eyes. Then a fresh, loved voice sounded just behind him, and he felt something tighten around his waist. "It's all right, dear," the voice called. "Hang on. We'll get you out." Sue was coming in after him. She had grasped the rope tied to his belt, and she and her father were pulling him back to the bank. He wanted to tell her to go back. The amoeba was only feet away, but he could only manage a little croak, and then he was safe up on the ledge at the other side of the river. A surge of strength filled his limbs, and he knew the shock was rapidly wearing off. But it was also wearing off of the monster in the water. Its speed increased. The ripplings of its amorphous body substance became quicker, more excited. It came on steadily. While it came, the girl and her father worked desperately over Phil, massaging his body and pulling him further up the bank. It had all but reached the bank when Holmes gasped, "I think I can walk now. Where did Quade go to?" Guinness gestured over to the right, up a dim winding passage through the rocks. "Then we must follow. Fast!" Phil said, staggering to his feet. "He may get to the sphere first. He'll go up by himself even yet. I'm all right." Despite his words, he could not run, and could only command an awkward walk. Sue lifted one of his arms around her shoulder, and her father took the other, and without a backward glance they labored ahead. But Phil's strength quickly returned, and they raised the pace until they had broken once more into a stumbling run. How far ahead James Quade was, they did not know, but obviously they could follow where he had gone. Once again the draft was strong on their backs. They felt sure they were on the last stretch, headed for the earth borer, but unless they could overtake Quade, he would be there first. They had no illusions about what that would mean. End of chapter 4.